associated with members of either bloc on the basis of mutual understanding. We would want to see ourselves a member of the non-aligned movement and participate in the deliberations of that organization. We also would want to see ourselves become a member of the Commonwealth as well as a member of the United Nations. But in relation to the two blocs, we are going to be absolutely neutral. We'll make friends, of course, with members of either side.
What about your relations with South Africa? Are you going to provide shelter to armed guerrillas who want to fight against the South African government's policies?
No, I've already said that we are going to follow a policy, a realistic policy in relation to South Africa. Our view is that we cannot avoid South Africa. It is a geographical reality, and so a policy of coexistence is the best thing we can do. Our view is that South Africa should avoid interfering in our affairs, and we should avoid interfering in South African affairs.
So you won't support opponents of apartheid from here?
We will support opponents of apartheid only politically and diplomatically at the international forums. But it is not our duty to take up arms against South Africa. It's the right and obligation of the people of South Africa to correct their own grievances their own way. We can only assist by giving them political and diplomatic support.
So you're saying then that you don't see yourself in Zimbabwe as being a frontline state, as for example Mr. Michel in Mozambique was to Rhodesia?
Of course we are not a frontline state. The struggle in South Africa is a national struggle for South Africans, and not one we should regard as Zimbabweans as our own concern.
You will not support an armed struggle in Zimbabwe?
No, we will not.
Can you tell us what your message would be to white people in Rhodesia now? They do have an image of you. We've been talking to them today as a Marxist, a communist who means to transform this economy and society. What is your message to them tonight?
Well, my message to them is that we would want to see them live in this country free from any restrictions, free from any victimization. To us, we cannot practice racialism in reverse. We just cannot do it in principle. As far as we are concerned, they're entitled to serve the nation as the blacks are entitled to do so. And hence we would want to see them develop a greater sense of security, greater sense of confidence, and greater sense of belonging. This is really our message to them.
You said you'd like to bring Mr. Nkomo into your government. Would you like to bring Mr. Ian Smith in to reassure the whites?
I would like to bring the Patriotic Front components together, and this means, of course, linking up ZANU and ZAPU in a coalition. It's not an exercise to bring Comrade Nkomo as a person, but because he's leader of ZAPU, we have a duty to bring him in. The question of bringing Mr. Smith doesn't arise, but our view
You mean you won't bring him in?
What I'm saying is that he should not be the concern. Our concern should be to try and create some deep sense of assurance on the part of the whites as a whole. And of course, it is not just Mr. Smith who can do that.
General Walls?
There are other people who can represent the whites as well. But we are discussing these matters, and I think we will reach some point of agreement with those who represent the white community.
General Walls, for example, you might ask him to be your commander-in-chief, might you?
I've had discussions with General Walls, and I have already given him our assurance that we do not intend to disrupt the services as they are. If we are going to effect any changes, this will take some time.
If you had to put your finger on one thing you'd like to change fast, what's that?
It's the position of the peasants. We would want to resettle them as quickly as possible, and the people who have been turned into refugees, who are either in urban centers or elsewhere, having fled from the war situation, and those who have gone out need a resettlement.
Does this mean taking European land?
It means, of course, acquiring land from the European sector, but here I must emphasize that there is lots of land which is unoccupied, which is underutilized, and land under absentee ownership. This is the land we are going to have to acquire, and in doing so, of course, we will be quite systematic and orderly and proceed according to our undertaking under the Lancaster House Agreement. That means, of course, compensate those whose land will be acquired.
And finally, how do you feel tonight?
I feel very overjoyed, but overwhelmed, as I have said. I think the victory we have achieved is a humbling one, and